All right, our first speaker is Steph Gooch, and she's going to talk about optimized data lakes. She is a commercial architect in the AWS Optics team. She's a subject matter expert, and she gets to work with customers to help them optimize their AWS spend. She helps them to manage their cloud utilization, improve their financial process, and educates them on all sorts of cool topics, saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process, and also helping them to be self-serve. Now, Steph is also the host of a weekly Twitch show. It's called The Keys to AWS Optimization. It's an awesome show. I've watched several of them, and I've been a guest as well. So take it away, Steph.
Thank you. Hey guys, thanks for having me. All right, let me check up some slides on this screen.
So Steph, I'm going to give you the floor. You got 15 minutes, then I'll bring you back in and we'll do a live Q&A session. Jeff and I are going to drop. Enjoy yourself. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. And thank you for coming today. Super excited to be the first speaker and to hopefully share some advice with you. So today you're going to learn about why building a data lake is important for optimization, the kind of data you need, and how to get started. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of QR codes throughout this so that you can actually get access to resources that I'm going to describe through this session. So have your phones ready. Okay, so a bit of background about me. As Jess said, my name is Steph Gooch. I am a senior commercial architect at AWS. Prior to this, I was a developer at KPMG for many years, and then I managed their FinOps team. In AWS, I work in a team called Optics, and we look after large global customers to help them optimize their spend. So every day I get to talk to amazing customers and actually find ways in which we can strategically get optimizations, cut their costs, improve their financial processes, and solve business problems. Okay, so now you got a bit of background about me. Let's actually get into the topic. So common reasons why you would need a data lake when it comes to optimization. So the first is things like reporting. We often hear about customers wanting to create complex reporting for stakeholders, and they need access to large sets of data to do this. So for me, that will be things like chargeback, showback, cost allocation, utilization reports, and these can all be solved by a data lake. As we are talking about optimization today, cost optimization is a big part of that. And utilization data and recommendations for savings can be spread across an entire organization, and it can be hard to get a clear picture of where you're making savings. Having a data lake will make it easier to access this information from all over the place. And kind of going on from this, how do you know if you're doing well at that optimization? How are you tracking your goals, your KPIs? If you don't have one clear pane of glass to look at, to go through, to see your goals and track them efficiently, then that can make things really difficult. So maybe this sounds familiar. Maybe you're one of the roles that will have these kind of challenges. Maybe you've heard of peers that have this kind of challenge. And hopefully today's talk will help you solve this. So what kind of data should be in your data lake? Well, as I'm a cost expert, the first data we need is cost data. And when it comes to cost data, there are three main options when you start with AWS. So there is your CSV billing data. This is often higher level, it's simple to understand, but realistically, when we're talking about today, we want to have a bit more control. So maybe you think about using Cost Explorer, which is a native tool which allows you to filter and group your data and get insights into what you are actually spending. But for our data lake, we're going to want to get a bit more granular. So the most granular report we can have is the cost and usage report. This is a really, really important service. So many customers take advantage of this, but there are so many more that still don't even know it exists. So I really want to preach to get this set up. First QR code there is going to be enabling you to set up your cost and usage report the best way you can. So there's a lot of tips on there about setting up with things like resource ID, so you can see what resources are actually causing your spend. When you look at it in an hourly granularity, so you can understand flexible services such as RDS or EC2. Are you actually using the flexible services as they're meant to be done? And also setting it up in a Parquet format. So most people will default set this up like a CSV, similar to their billing report, but Parquet means that you can actually utilize the serverless database Athena and get access to your data. And this is kind of the foundation of the cost data lake that we're going to build. And I'm going to give a tip through each one of these sections. So the first tip is the granular, the better. So when you're setting up this cost data lake, you want to make sure that all of your data that you get is super granular. The Kerr does that for you, but we can also going to talk about some services later. And when you can, always go granular. So we have the cost data, but what else is needed? Well, when it comes to your business, we need to understand your organization. How are you supposed to track utilization and optimization if you don't know who owns what? And for this, you need an efficient account structure. And we have the following account structure that we see many customers utilize. I used to use it when I was a customer. So if you're starting out or reviewing your account structure, this is really key. If you've seen me present, like Jeff said, on my Twitch show or other events, you might have seen this slide before, but I really want to emphasize this setup because it is key to making sure that things like those reports we mentioned are as simple as possible. So in this account structure, first of all, we start with our organization. This is often in your payer account and is your centralized hub that looks across your entire estate. Within this, we have our organizational units. These are your naturally occurring groups of accounts. So they could be products, teams, whatever works best for your business. And within them, we have our linked accounts. So as you can see from the slide, these have names such as production, development, or tooling, or sandbox. And the key thing with this is that everything within that account is related to that name, or even a tag, because you can tag accounts and OUs in your organization. So when it comes to our resources, our EC2s, our S3s, the things we know and love, it means when it comes to things like tagging, you don't actually have to tag the resources with this kind of metadata because you can inherit it from the account above. So that was a lot of information to kind of squeeze in, but I wanted to shout out the lab that we have, which is a way to collect that metadata from your organization and allow you to connect it to your cost and usage report because the data is not in there natively. So things like tag, OU name, and your account names can actually be injected into your CUR to make your reporting a lot simpler. This is really important, tagging especially, because if you have developers who are building that infrastructure every day, you don't want to have to maybe depend on them to make changes to the tags if necessarily, or even tag at all with this kind of data. Leave tagging for things like security or scheduler or other resources that actually affect the resource. Maybe you don't need it for things like chargeback. And shout out to John on his pod, which should be an episode coming out recently where we talk about a lot of this in depth. So keep an eye out for that. So the tip for this one is have an ownership strategy. It's so much easier to optimize resources when you know who owns them and when you have data attached to them. Okay, so we've talked about our cost data, our accounts, but what about those actual resources that I keep mentioning? So similar to account metadata, we need to collect all this information and make sure it is organized. So when I talk about services, I'm talking about a couple of different things in this situation. So we have service data in general. So this can kind of be like an inventory of what you're using. So this could be simple as what EBS volumes have you got in a list, or even what savings plans and other commitments you have at AWS. Ensuring you keep track of all this information is vital. Then we have things like tooling, Trusted Advisor, Compute Optimizer, S3 Lens. I don't know about you, but I used to find it really annoying when I was a developer if I owned 3 different accounts, prod, dev, test, and I had to keep logging into each one of them to go and get the data. So how about we pull that information all together so you can see across your entire application or project rather than each account? And then we have utilization data. Some services that you want to go in and understand how you're utilizing, maybe you want to collect those into one centralized place, something like CloudWatch. So what we're recommending today, and the premise of this data lake for optimization, is about ingesting this all into one centralized location. And that is going into our third tip, centralize your data. Trust me, it's a lot easier if everything is in one place together. It doesn't have to be all in the same bucket. It just means that if you know where it all is together and you can connect it, then you have the power over all this data. So normally we suggest putting this all into S3, and the QR code that we have on this one is actually for a collector lab, which is super exciting. We've got some new developments coming out for it to be multi-cloud as well, but that's a whole other story that maybe we'll talk about another time. But the premise is having all of this data together means you can connect it. So not only can you connect your tags from your accounts to your costs, you could also link it back to your savings plan information or to your Compute Optimizer recommendations. So you can link this all together and have that power to kind of make changes and see the impact and streamline your business processes. Okay, so that's all the data we're going to collect. We've got our cost data, account data, service, but how do we actually access this information? So when it comes to S3 data lakes, there's a couple of ways in which I like to use this from my point of view. The first is Amazon Athena. I mentioned it at the start when we talked about the cost and usage report. This is a serverless database that you can use SQL on, or Presto really, and it allows you to query data in S3. This is default set up with the cost and use report. There is a handy little file that is in your bucket in your cost and use report that helps you set up your database for this. And the other labs that I've mentioned build on this kind of concept that all your data can be accessed through Athena. So this means that you can create queries and reports and export that data to do your reporting. And once you have these queries made, you can automate it. So you can use something like Lambda to automate the query and email it to someone. That's what I used to use a lot of the time. We would create automated reports for finance and send that email out every month. And same for stakeholders, same for business managers. So they got the data on time and it was accurate. But say you want to get some pictures for this data, you want to understand this, mess around with the data a bit more, have a bit more flexibility, you can use Amazon QuickSight for this, which is our BI tool to visualize information. So the tip with this one, stick with me, is that not everyone will only give access to data that your users need. And the QR code, it's connected. This is for our cloud intelligence dashboards. These are really cool dashboards that allow you to visualize your costs and actually play with this information. They're based on Athena queries, and we are able to see your spend, look at your optimization, and I'll touch on these in a second. But my tip, only give access to data your users need, can sound a bit random. But what I'm talking about here is making sure from an operational and a security point of view that people can see this cost data who need to see the cost data. So for example, when I used to create reports for our finance team, they don't care about the really nitty-gritty elements of it. They care about the chargeback model. They care about what they can put straight into SAP. So when I was talking to finance, I'd say, what fields do you need? What kind of data do you need? And can we automate that so that they can just take the data and put it straight into their services? The same goes for managers. They care about all of their accounts. They want to split it up by service, maybe even by resource, depending on what they're doing. So make sure you're having discussions with people to find out what operationally can help them do their job. And then from a security point of view, restricting access to data can be quite key in a lot of businesses. Some businesses don't care about it when it comes to cost data. Others need to be that restrictive. And we are going to be bringing out something called row-level security with the connection to the cost intelligence dashboards soon in the next couple of weeks, which is really exciting. And this will enable you to tag those accounts that we mentioned earlier with users who can only see access to that data, and they can go into QuickSight and see their own data, which is really cool. But again, a whole other topic. I'll show you how to keep track of some of the stuff that my team releases at the end. But wait, stick around for that. Okay, so I've covered quite a lot, so let's summarize this whole data lake that I've been talking about. So in summary, for this data lake, we're pulling together all data for cost data and optimization opportunities. The key point is that when you have all this data in one place and it's automatically pulled together, this increases your speed and accuracy when providing external reports and solving those other business problems that we talked about earlier. So looking at the reports kind of on the right of the screen, we have those basic CSV reports that you can be exporting to your finance, to your stakeholders, whoever needs it. We have our cloud intelligence dashboards that allow you to go in there and have a look at your data, mix around with it, try different things, filter, group by, mess around and kind of get some examples and understand your numbers. And then we have things like the Compute Optimizer or Trusted Advisor dashboards that use the data from these tooling sections so that you can make accurate decisions about where to optimize first, and you can kind of attack the situation. So for example, if you have thousands of recommendations on Compute Optimizer, maybe you want to narrow that scope down to just the biggest hitters so that you can make the biggest impact with a little less time. What's key at that end is that accounts data. Remember, we need to understand who owns what so we can actually make these savings. Okay, so let's just run through these tips. So the first, the granular, the better. The Kerr does this for you, but when you are getting other tooling data, maybe from third-party toolings, go for as detailed as possible so that you can understand what you're actually doing. Have an ownership strategy. Spend the time making sure that you don't have any orphaned accounts or orphaned resources. This can become a headache later, so you want to try and avoid that. Centralize your data. Make it as easy for you in the future as possible by bringing everything together so you have that one pane of glass. Only give access to the data your users need. Make their lives easier, make your lives easier by sharing information that's going to help them do their job. And finally, a bonus one, automation is key. Through all of these stages, we've kind of mentioned about Lambda with automation with the Kerr. A lot of these things do it, and a lot of the labs that I've recommended will help you do this. But automation is something that we really like to strive for so that you can reuse processes or you can even optimize your own workload yourself. So if you've enjoyed hearing what I've been talking about, as Jeff mentioned, I have a weekly Twitch show called The Keys to AWS Optimization. We had an episode on today. We are at 3:30 BT or 7:30 PSD, so quite early. So all of our videos are on YouTube, so you can watch later. But we have a guest on every week, and it's a 30-minute show that just helps you optimize, whether it could be optimizing a service or even optimizing from a kind of FinOps point of view in terms of strategy. So there's episodes loads on there. Check out Jeff. John's coming on in the future. And so that's it, guys. If you have any questions in the future, awssteph@amazon.com and or tweet me at Lift Like a Nerd. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Steph, so much for that. Yes, Live Like a Nerd is on Twitter, Instagram, and all your other social media applications. Steph, thank you so much for the insights on optimizing your data lake. I got a couple questions for you as we wrap some things up. Now, you talked about the centralization of your data. Is this a specific account that this is in, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, so I always recommend having a separate cost account. People have lots of different terms for it. They might call it a CCB account. They might just call it a FinOps account. Whatever works for you. I refer to it as a cost account. The benefit of having this is that when I talk about all these labs, they involve a lot of Lambda functions, querying data, bucket. You don't maybe want that on your management account because of, especially things like security, you don't want people clicking around in that account all the time. That is a very important account and should be very locked down who has access. So giving your CCOE, FinOps, CFM team their own account where they can build all these mechanisms is really powerful. And what we recommend is having roles that you assume into other accounts to get that data, kind of a read-only role, which can be found in the collector account. So it's good for security, but it's also good for cost. People forget that when you purchase things like RIs and savings plans, they are trying to kind of save money in the account that you are in first. So if you have a load of Lambda functions running regularly and you have savings plans in that account, they will try and save money on those first, rather than maybe going off to another account and getting you more savings. So from a security and a cost and from a cost point of view, recommend having a designated account.
You talked about the labs. Now, I did drop a link in the chat for everybody to access the labs who didn't have the QR code up. The question in the chat is, so as this is a solution part of well-architected labs, and how does it fit with the CID dashboards?
Yep. So all of those QR codes, I think, are all well-architected labs that are available. So the well-architected labs are free labs that you can, the kind of how-to guide on how to deploy things in your accounts. They have them for all the pillars, not just cost, so you can go check them out. But yeah, all the labs are either standalone or a lot of them do integrate with the Cloud Intelligence dashboards. So for example, the account collector name one, so that gets all the tags and all the names, you can actually pass that information into the Cloud Intelligence dashboard and improve your kind of tagging for your group by, or even add your names in if you're deploying it in a linked account. And the collector lab, optimization data collector, very long name, I'm going to shorten it to the collector, powers the TAO dashboard and the Compute Optimizer dashboard. So there's a lot of kind of overlap and they all integrate together.
Earlier this week, Steph and I had a conversation for setting you up for success in AWS. And when we say set her up, we're talking about either a net new account or an existing account and some of the things that you should or shouldn't do and set up. Now, Steph educated me on a number of things because I thought I knew how to set us up for success, but it turns out that I was setting up my curve file incorrectly. Now, while Steph's trying to get her camera to work, no big deal. Steph, are you there?
Tell me when you want me to magish, John.
No, there she is.
I'm back. I did that, by the way. I did that.
You know what? You know what, Giddy? Thank you so much. And for that, I'm hiding you from the screen. Hey, you were hiding yourself at the same time I was. That was perfect timing. Steph, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. So sorry about that.
No, not at all. This is all part of it and humor. So, Steph, you and I earlier this week, we talked about setting up for success. And I want to ask you, what is the first thing that, and let's just talk about a net new AWS account, because you're figuring you might have done some of the other stuff already, but we're going to get to those and apply to all, whether it's new or not. What's the first thing you should do with your AWS account?
Okay, so I touched on this earlier. It was all about the cost and use report. Get that set up. And like John mentioned, his one was I'm not going to say wrong, but it was set up maybe in a different way than I recommend. So it just means what we said was I mentioned earlier in my talk was looking at things such as having Parquet set up and making sure that you are enabling resource IDs and that it overwrites the report and that it's done hourly. So they're the kind of top tips, because when you start at Amazon and you want to start building, keeping track of your costs is so important so that you don't get bill shock, which does happen to people. I make sure that on my account I have all this stuff set up, and also setting up Cost Explorer. So you have to enable that so you can see your costs. So number one, setting up an account, even if you're just trying out some stuff, you're maybe doing a training course, try that out as well.
So Steph, I created a new AWS account. I'm going to be putting together some videos on what, and based off of your blog post that I actually have, is some of the steps you should do when you first get started up. And I'm going to walk folks through it. I set up the account. I haven't done anything else. And I'm going to set up the cost and usage report. But I also want to set up, and you mentioned a crawler for Athena. Can you talk about that? Because I didn't even know about that. I want to get it deployed, but there's a certain way you should set up your cur for the right prefix in order for this to work.
Yeah, this is something that didn't used to, I think when I went to reInvent 2018, it didn't exist. And I'd actually built it. Like as I was doing my dissertation and I was like, I'm going to build this functionality. And then I went to reInvent and Nathan Mesh were like, we've just released this thing. And I was like, oh, just wasted some time. But basically what happens is when you select Parquet format, which is set up for Athena, a handy YAML file will get placed into your S3 bucket. And what that contains is a couple of roles, some Lambda functions and a crawler, so that when you start putting data in that S3 bucket, so every 24 hours, Amazon puts some data in, which will be all your cost stuff. What it will do, it'll actually crawl over that data and look for any changes to it. So that could be additional columns, it could be new partitions. So going back a bit, partitions, so the pair is broken up by year and month, so we can kind of separate that data. And then when I talk about columns, you might be like, why is Amazon adding new columns to my care? Well, say on day one, you haven't bought any savings plans because you haven't got any resources. But day 20, day 100, you've decided, okay, I'm going to buy $1 an hour of savings plans. That's going to add a new column to your cost and usage report. So we want to make sure that it picks up that data.
Now, I didn't realize this when we were talking about it before, but you said this crawler set up and it's set up automatically, because I was thinking, wait a second, do I have to deploy this out? But if I set up the Parquet format, it automatically places the YAML file in my S3 bucket.
Yep, so you still have to deploy the CloudFormation, but the file will be there for you. So all you have to do is when you go to CloudFormation, you can select the S3 URL option and then link straight to that file and then update it. And it will do it for you.
Gotcha. Nice. All right. So after I have my cur set up, what's the next thing I should do? Because we were talking the chicken before the egg, basically having the cur versus an account or an organization. Is that the next step, or is there something else I should do?
So it depends how big you're going to go. I recommend setting up an organization because I think it's free to do. And so what that means is you get a lot more control over your account, and you can also create linked accounts. So similar to what I mentioned before about having the payer account being kind of somewhere where you want to be really secure. If you are deploying out loads of stuff, why don't you keep that account separate, and that is your billing account, and then you have another account where you go and do other stuff, where you deploy your resources. So if you do scale from one account to 1,000 accounts, you already have that billing account kind of separated. So enabling an AWS organization will give you this power. So not only can you create linked accounts to it, but you can also do things like set up tag policies or policies in general, service control policies on your accounts to give you some more kind of governance and control from that high level.
Gotcha. All right. So I have my cur set up and the organizations. Now, the organizations are very key. There's a number of things you can do within an organizations, not only your savings plans, your RIs, and an organizational structure, but what is the value of having the organization set up?
So definitely having control over, there's a couple of different things. There's definitely the policies are a big one. I think things like Control Tower can utilize this quite well, but it is going to be, like I said, that diagram with the different account levels. Having this means that you can separate your infrastructure. So if you are starting out, then it means that you can have a special account for one thing and a special account for another thing, rather than sharing all your resources in that singular location. I think that's one of the big things. But I'm sure someone from the CloudOps world will tell me there's 100 more reasons why you should use organizations that are way highly available and security wise that are really important that I just don't know.
Speaking of highly available security wise, Joe chimed in policy enforcement. Yes, your servers control policies for your organizations from root down for individualized accounts. I like the value of having an organization structure, not only setting up your automated accounts using Control Tower, but each account comes with their own services, the limitations, quotas, but you also get the free tier in there so you can use some utilization, separate the blast radius. I'm sorry, I was just going on and on.
No. But that really links into last week on my Twitch show, we had someone talking about free tier and kind of pointed out that you get up to a certain level on an account for free tier. So if you get a new account, you could still get the next level of free tier on that account. So something to maybe think about. But definitely the splitting up different things. A good example is if you want to control kind of what resources are built in what accounts, what regions you're building out in different accounts. So I know that some customers like to just build in, say, Ireland, and they want everyone to build in Ireland. But of course, people sometimes click on the wrong region. They might not even realize their default region is Virginia. And so they'll deploy out resources by accident and leave them running. It could be wasting money without realizing. So why not just stop that from the start? Have a policy which means that you can't deploy into that region. This does kind of lock down a lot of things. And we didn't go into this in the podcast a lot, but when you come to this kind of governance control, when you put in these rules, you have to be really careful that you don't confine. I think someone else talks about this as well. Don't confine people too much. So you don't lock down all the regions and then say you never can use this region, because say you need to use that region for a certain use case. So it's really important when you have these controls that you allow, especially developers, a way to go and ask and say, okay, I want to have this special use case. Can I use this? And have a way for them to kind of have that open conversation. So don't just lock people out. Make sure there is actual kind of governance and education on it.
Real quick. So guess what? I did just get word that, and it's like, I wanted to be that news anchor. Yep. All right. So Evan was able to join us, and I want to bring him on in just a couple of moments first. But Steph, I have one question. What is the importance of having all the stakeholders in the room when making decisions? I'm not talking about 30 people, but everybody from each of those teams to understand it. And cost is one of those when you're talking about your AWS environment, including cost when you have a security event.
Yep. So really important when it comes to the same way you would do kind of security reviews. When you have an application, say, and you're doing a monthly review, and I remember people would just focus on security or focus on what tasks they completed in a sprint, or focus on what applications they had pushed out the door like that month or that week. That is, of course, really key. That's one of the benefits of the cloud. You can move quickly, but ensure that having some kind of KPIs, costs, or budgets are available when having those meetings, because it is something you want to control. You want to develop a cost-aware culture. So having it in front of people, if it's the cost explorer, if it's the cost intelligence dashboard, whatever it is, having your own tool, a third-party tool, whatever, having that just visually in the meeting, someone can say, okay, what's happening? Are we on budget? Are we on trend? Because businesses are all about making money most of the time. So you want to make sure that when you develop in the cloud, you are being cost aware. And any questions, I've seen there's loads in the chat. I'll stay online and we'll answer some of those.
First of all, Steph, thank you so much for jumping in there. I do have to comment. Nice shirt, by the way.
Twinsies.
Yeah, did you like that? Well, thank you for coming back on. So I figured a quick wardrobe change just in your honor. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you for having me back, and have a good rest of your day, guys.